Okay, now that we know how to populate an array and loop through an array, let's populate an array a bit differently. Instead of doing it in the code like we did here, let's populate the array from data from a worksheet and show you how to do that. So let's say we have a worksheet here that has some data in it, and for simplicity's sake, let's just say I have the months listed out in column A from January to December, and I want to put these months in an array, and then I want to display a message box that has the current that tells me what the current month is. So let's do that. Let's create a sub procedure, sub populate one dimensional. So we're going to populate a one dimensional array from the worksheet. And now let's see, how many variables do we need to hold? We need to hold 12 variables, so I'm going to declare an array that can hold 12 variables, dim months, and the upper bound of the array is going to be 11. And it's going to be able to hold all 12 months because the index of the array begins at 0, so the index is going to go from 0 to 11 with the upper bound being 11. So I put that in the parentheses, and then these months are strings, so I'm going to put as string here for the data type of the array. And now I'm going to declare a couple other things. Dim I as integer, I'm going to use that as a counter variable, and then dim x row as long, and I'm going to use that to hold the row number on the worksheet. And now I want to set I equal to 0, and actually I told you it would be a counter variable, and it will be, but it will be a placeholder for the index of the array. So I is going to be a variable for the index of the array, and then x row is going to equal 2. So this is a variable for the row number on worksheet. So I put x row is equal to 2 because my months start in row 2. And now I want to populate the array with these months. So I'll do a do until loop. I'll do until cells row index. Okay, I need to put a row in here, so I'm going to use my variable x row. Column index, well, the months are in column 1. So I want to do a loop. I want to do something until I get to this blank cell down here. So I'm going to start in row 2 and loop down until I get to a blank cell. So I'll do until cells x row comma 1 dot value is equal to blank. And then I'll put loop, and I want to increment my row variable each time through the loop. So I'll do x row is equal to x row plus 1. And now I want to populate my array. So to do that, I got to use the name of the array, and then I got to use the variable for my index of the array, months I, is equal to cells x row comma 1 dot value. So this populates the array. That populates the array. But after I do that, after I put I in there, after I put the value in the array at index I, the next time through the loop, I need to have, when I put a value in, I needs to be set to 1 bigger. So I'm going to do I is equal to I plus 1 right after I put a value in it, so that the next time through the loop, when I put a value in it, I put it in the next element in the array. So now if I run this and I move this over, what we should see, and I pull up the locals window here, moved. There we go. Okay. So I'll put a breakpoint there, and I'll put my cursor in there and hit run. And this months it's an array that it can hold strings, and you can see the index starts at 0 and it goes down to 11. That means it can hold 12 things. And here I get to the loop line, and if I step through this, the first time through, x row is going to be equal to, if I go down to the locals window, x row is equal to 2, right? Because we set it equal to 2 here. And now it does this. It does cells x row comma 1 dot value. Well, that's row 2 comma 1. That's this January here. It's going to put it in the months array at index I, and I is equal to 0. So what we should see after this line of code is that months 0 here gets assigned the value January, and there it is. After I step over that line, January is now in the array. And then I could step through again, and now I went to I plus 1 here in this line, and x row went to x row plus 1. So that means now I'm going to put something in a place where I is equal to 1, and what I'm going to put in it is row 3, because I incremented the row here and I incremented I. So now I'm ready to move on and put another piece of data in, and you can see now I have February in the array after I do that. So I'm incrementing my index in the array. At the same time, I'm moving down column A, and if I just hit play, I'll put a breakpoint here on n sub. If I hit play, look what happens. My array is populated with January, February, March, April, May, June, July, all the way to December. And I is equal to 12, and x row is equal to 14. So it did, the loop, it looped until it came to a cell that's blank, and the cell that's blank is in row 14, and that's why when it jumped out of the loop and it came to the end sub, when the loop finished, its x row is equal to 14, because row 14 column 1 has a value of blank. So what we just did is populate an array with data from a worksheet, and to do that, an easy way is to use this do until loop, and to just loop down a column or a loop across a row and do something like this. Loop until you encounter a blank cell, or loop until something. Or if you know how many times you're going to loop, you can use a for next loop. Or you can do it many different ways, because there's different ways to loop, as we've seen. But now I want to loop through this array, and I want to put a message box that tells me what the current month is. So to do this, as we've seen before, let me just end this now. I'll use a for next loop, and I'll use this for next loop to loop through this months array. So I'll do for I is equal to 0 to u bound months comma 1, and we know what that does. Next I. Notice I declared a variable I up here, and I used it in this loop, and we saw just now that when I get out of this loop, I is equal to 12. So I can reuse that variable I as long as I initialize it or reset it to the right thing. So I need to set I equal to 0. So I'm using the I variable in this loop, and I'm going to use it in this loop, but here I'm resetting it to 0, and that's critical. If you didn't reset it, you would, or if you didn't reset it, or you reset to something wrong, you would get some bad results. So what do we want to do? We have an array that has an index that starts at 0, ends at 11, and this for next loop will loop from 0 to 11, and we know that this is 11. U bound comma months comma 1 gives us the number 11, because it's the U bound is the highest index in this array months in this dimension, because we only have a one-dimensional array. So now we can loop through the months. We can loop through the months array, and I want to write an if statement. So now I'm going to do something like this: if months I is equal to month name, month date, then end if. So I want a message box to display the current month. And how do I find the current month? Like today is September 9th. How does the computer tell me that it's the current month of September? Well, that's what this line does. So what does this line do? Well, these are all things that VBA provides us. If you want to know what date it is, you can just write the word date and it'll return the current date. If you want to know what month it is, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way out to 12, this returns a number. This month function, you put in a parameter that's a date, and it'll return a number between 1 and 12. That'll give you the month. And then there's another function called month name, where you give it a parameter that is a number between 1 and 12, and it'll give you the name of the month. So these are functions provided to us by VBA, and date is a function that returns the current date. So if I get the current date and then I grab a month number between 1 and 12, that's what I can do here. I can use the month function to get that number between 1 and 12. Then I could use the month name function to get the current month. So all I'm doing is using functions that are provided to us by VBA, and I'm saying if the current month here, if this current month is equal to the month in my array, then I want to do a message box. I'll do the current month is, then I'll append something, months. I'll just show you what this is. So now I'll get a message box that says the current month is whatever the current month is. So if we run this, let me just run this. It says the current month is September, and that's correct because it is September right now. So the main point of this video are two things. One, how do you populate an array from with data from a worksheet? Well, you do something like this. You loop, and then you fill the array with whatever's on the worksheet. So here's my array, months, and you use a variable for the index, and then you increment that variable. And every time through the loop, when you're incrementing that variable, you want to put something in that particular element. And what you're putting through that element, what you're putting in that array, also has to change as you iterate through the worksheet. So you want to increment also the row or the column in the worksheet, and then throw data in that way. And the other thing that's interesting about this video is that sometimes you're going to need to loop through an array and pick out an element that matches a condition. And you could do that here. Like here, use a for next loop, like we've seen before, to loop through an array. But then within that for next loop, you can put an if that will check an element, or check the elements of the array. And if they match a condition, like, oh, if the element is this or that, in this case I did if the element is the current month, then you could write some code. In this case, all I did is say if the element in the array is the current month, then tell me that. But you could put all kinds of stuff in here. And the real interesting thing to remember is that this code is looping over the entire array. So if your array had 1,000 things in it, this loop would loop through it would loop through all 1,000 things with just this code. If there were 1,000 months in the year, this code, this for next loop, would loop over all 1,000 months, and then this is checking each element in the array, and it's going, does it meet a condition? Does it meet a condition? Does it meet a condition? 1,000 times it's checking, and if it does, it's going to do something. So that's all this video was about. It was about how to populate data from a worksheet, and then how to loop through the array and match on a condition. In the next video, we will look more at arrays, and we will look at two-dimensional arrays and how to loop over them, because it's a little bit different.